I have this theory in my head, and I'm going to write it up for the new Fatherhood at some point. But the idea of there are three ages of scarcity. The first age of scarcity is scarcity of money. And you go into that age from whenever the first time that you were a kid and you wanted something and you didn't have the money to buy it, that's you're entering the like scarcity of money era. Okay. And there are people who never like sadly never escape that era, and money is always a problem for their entire lives. But I think that there are a lot of people now who, when they get to mid 30s, early 40s, maybe, it could be earlier, it could be later, you go into the second era of scarcity, which is scarcity of time, right? So you have enough money to buy the things you want. You maybe don't have quite enough to like buy a huge house or buy a particular thing, but time becomes the thing that you need more than anything. If you start to think about how do I optimize my life, not that you start to think about that, but you might realize you're in a job and you're working 50, 60 hours a week and you don't have any spare time to do things that you would want to do with the money that you're making. This is where I found myself when I was at Google back in like 2015 in the US going, this is great. I'm getting paid and I have a really good job on paper and everything's great, but I don't see my kids. I don't see my daughter at all. I don't get to spend time with my wife. We're in this amazing state and we don't enjoy it. And so optimizing around time as the scarcity. And then I think the third era of scarcity that you go into at a later age is, I think, scarcity of health. Okay. And you've got the money to be able to do things. You've got the time, but you probably, hey, you know what? We can't go on that round the world trip because I've got this health problem, or I need to be close to my dog. We can't really do that now. We're not as kind of young and carefree as we used to be. So you've got the money and you've got the time, but you just don't have the health to be able to enjoy it.
This is a new and strange environment at first, suddenly finding yourself in orbit.
I'm Neville Andrew Mara, and this is Never Normal, a show about breaking free from the boring default plan and living life on your terms instead. There's an expression, I don't know where it came from originally, but something like youth is wasted on the young. And thinking about, you expressed it in terms of scarcity, but I guess you could flip it around and say, like, when you're young, you have an abundance of time, and typically, not everybody, unfortunately, but you have an abundance of health. And I think part of what we're collectively realizing, I don't even know, and when I say we collectively, like, I'm really struggling for a term to describe those of us. I use Never Normal, hence the name of the show, but the people who've sort of opted out of that default path of like kind of middle class, career for 30 or 40 years, the standard 9 to 5, we're sort of recognizing that, like, hey, wait a minute, we're at a stage of our lives where we do have an abundance of these things, namely health and time. And should we squander all of that or much of that towards a career with that, like, really to the exclusion of everything else, right? Which is what, especially something like we mentioned, Paul, careers like consulting and especially I think investment banking and often law, like a lot of these kind of prestigious careers, you make a lot of money, you solve that money scarcity issue, but at what cost?
I think people go into careers like that sometimes and say, well, I'll just do it for a little while. I'll do it for 10 years and then I'm out. And then 10 years, within that 10 years, they meet someone, they get married, they have some kids, they realize, hey, I'm making a lot of money. I can go, get a really big house with a really big mortgage, and we can get 2 super nice cars, and we're only paying £500 a month for them. And very quickly you paint yourself into this corner where you need 10,000, 20,000 a month coming in to continue living the life that you've made yourself comfortable in. So it doesn't become a 10 years and out. It becomes this is my life now.
It becomes this is your life now, and there's a certain amount of lifestyle creep. And then even later, if you do have this sort of presence of mind or just desire to change something, it's very hard to then cut back. You might say, well, I don't want to work here anymore, or I want to get out of this industry, but your burn rate is whatever it is, $20,000 a month. And so the options that you consider are only those things which will pay that. And, I think most businesses or most interesting things that you could do in life have a degree of uncertainty associated with them, especially in the beginning. And so that's really going to limit you to just like this is another sure thing, which is probably something else that's going to require that type of a commitment.
And it all comes down to where I mean, it sounds so obvious, but it's kind of like where you see yourself. I had a really good friend when I lived in the Bay Area, and he told me that he went to see a financial advisor, and the financial advisor said to him, you need $3 to $5 million to be able to retire properly. Okay, that's what you should be aiming for in terms of like all your assets, all your investments, put your kids through college, da da da. And what he said, my head exploded. The guy's telling you that's how much money you need if you want to retire in the Bay Area. We spent time in Bali, and a family of four, can live a very incredible life there for $1,000 a month. You don't need millions to be able to go. You don't need millions to retire in certain places. It all depends on kind of like where you see your life going and where you kind of see the path taking you.
I want to talk about the new fatherhood. Dads have been giving advice, whether we like it or not, for as long as humans have existed, I assume. What did you feel was like missing from the existing kind of canon of fatherly wisdom that prompted you to say, hey, there's an opportunity here, or there's a need here, and I want to contribute to that?
I've been a dad now. My eldest is 7. So, counting pregnancy time, stuff like that, let's say 8 years I've been on this fatherhood journey myself. In all that time, I really struggled to find something that spoke to me, that like spoke to my experience, that kind of treated fatherhood with the respect of the opportunity that it presented. Right? It's really, if you think about it, it's one of the biggest projects that you'll ever take on. If you think about it, if you put it kind of like your work hat on and look at it, it's you're kicking off a job or a project or a piece of work that is going to last at least 18 years. You're committed to it for the rest of your life, really, but it's going to be an 18-year long project. And we see so many opportunities for growth everywhere in life. It's like, I'm going to go to this job and I'm going to learn how to use Illustrator. I'm going to kind of go on this retreat and I'm going to learn how to facilitate workshops. Or I'm going to kind of go on this meditation, 10-day silent retreat and learn more about myself. And there are all these things that we look at and we go, this is a chance for me to become better. This is a chance for me to learn a craft and really figure something out. And I never saw anything that thought about fatherhood in that same way. And really the vast majority of fatherhood related writing out there was, I'll be nice and say subpar. Okay? You would have so many great books, so many great nonfiction books, all these incredible pieces of writing. And the great writing about fatherhood, it was sometimes subtext in different fiction books. There was an occasional Michael Chabon wrote this incredible article for GQ about taking his 14-year-old son, who was, I don't think they called out in the book whether he was non-binary or his gender or his sexuality or anything, because of course he was a teenage boy, but took him around all the fashion shows in Paris one week. And Michael Chabon wrote about it, and then he turned that into a book of his own. So there were pockets of great writing in places, and I just thought, man, I really wish there was a book, a really great book about fatherhood, or a really great piece, publication that I could read every week. And it wasn't there. So during the lockdown last year, I started writing it. I started putting together the outline for a book. I started kind of writing different essays and how it would form, and then realized that there was just this huge kind of moment for newsletters. It really feels like, and these things are all cyclical. Newsletters are not a new format in any way, shape, or form, and they'll come into fashion, they'll go out again, and things will come back around. It's like podcasts, newsletters, blogs, all these things go up and down. But I'm 38. I've been on the internet since I was 11 years old. I've always been trying things out and seeing what happens. And I just thought, I'm going to take these bits of writing and I'm just going to send them out once a week. And I'm going to give myself a year, with any type of creative endeavor, especially one that you do on the internet. You don't know what's going to happen. You can kind of you put it out there and you have the best intention and you have to see what happens. So I said, I'm going to give myself a year of this. I'm going to write it once a week for a year. And at the end of the year, I'll make a decision. And very quickly, it really struck a nerve with people. People really responded to it. And I remember a friend emailing me in the early days of it, and he said, it's like you're the first person to figure out that dads also have feelings. Yeah, I like that. That's a really good, because it was, and it was really, so much of what I write is it's all about transparent. It's all about vulnerability. And it's all about having these conversations with other men about the emotions around fatherhood that we're not having, that we very rarely have with our friends, and I didn't see them happening anywhere else online. So the idea of the new fatherhood, the name in itself, it's not about my fatherhood experience. It is not, a lot of what I write about is obviously through my own personal lens, but the new fatherhood itself it's a platform for all kinds of, I'll say quote unquote fathers, but anyone who identifies as a father to be able to come together to share their experience.
I love it. And how far into that year are you, or has it been a year already?
Today is the 8th of October. So if I always have my everything on the go. So this week's issue will be issue number 42. 42 of 52 weeks.
10 weeks out.
Yeah.
And even if the goal is still to write a book, I mean, I think the idea of shipping it weekly as a newsletter is fantastic because a few things happen, right? You have that forcing function, which is just magical, where it's like now somebody's waiting for it, right? If you give yourself a year to write a book, you could spend 364 days thinking about it or procrastinating or whatever, but you've got a deadline every week, and deadlines are just magical. But you're also getting feedback along the way, which I think is really cool. You're seeing what topics are resonating and maybe even just what you enjoy writing about, what connects well. And at the end of that, now you've got an audience. If you decided to ship it as a book that you wouldn't necessarily have otherwise, my marketing brain can't let that piece of it all go. But you've also found ways to explore the topics, and it could grow into something much more lasting and ongoing, I suppose. Do you think you will still compile a book out of it, or just keep it as a newsletter?
It's been really interesting to go on the journey, because I think I was worried about going away for a year and writing something and then putting it out in the world, and it just doesn't resonate at all. So you're right. So I can see what people respond to, what parts of it people like, what people don't. Actually, some things that I write about that, I wrote this thing a while ago I wrote it a few weeks ago about addiction, but kind of like how much we depend on devices and how much it actually conflicts with the parent that we want to be. And we're all talking about screen time as of an issue with kids, like screen time. And maybe the problem with screen time is not how much time the kids are spending on the screens, but how much time the adults are spending. And it really resonated with people, but there were also people who didn't like it, because it's kind of like, I don't need you to tell me about that. I know and people, for me, it's trying to figure out in terms of the newsletter, like, what do I want to be doing? Do I want to be pushing people? Do I want to be inviting people? And it's like week by week, it's nice to kind of like go in different areas. It's nice to like 1 week, like to invite someone into something that I've been thinking about, another week to like push people into something that maybe they haven't been thinking about themselves. And, so much of this is a kind of a journey of self-discovery for all the people who read it. There are a lot of moms who read it. There are lots of people who email me and say, I don't have kids, but I just really like your writing, and I'm thinking about having kids in the future, so it's good to be able to see something like this. Do I think it will become a book eventually? It seems like the most logical next place to go. There are so many. My background is marketing, advertising. That's kind of my day job. And so I'm never short of ideas about what to do. It's like, hey, I could do this, spin it out here, a book for adults, a book for kids, an event, a pop-up, online courses, like all these things. And I've been trying to think at the moment, again, I could do all of these things, but that would very quickly become my full-time job. And actually, I probably don't need to do all of them. What I've been thinking about a lot lately is this, is a YouTube video. A guy flicks over a domino. Have you seen this thing? And the first domino he flicks over is like the size of your little finger. And he flicks that one and it hits a domino that's twice its size. Okay. And then that one falls over and hits one that's twice. And the idea being is like, as long as the next domino is no bigger than twice the size, the first domino will knock it over. And very quickly, the ninth domino is 8 foot tall and it falls over. And I've been thinking about this a lot recently because I feel like I need to just figure out in what order do I put these dominoes. And obviously, like year one, it was about the newsletter, the writing, and it was about the community that I've kind of created. my ideal scenario in the first year was to try paid subscriptions and see if they work. And it's worked, and it's working great. And it seems to have really resonated with people. And there's a community that they join, and there's a group of dads in there who are all sharing. They're sharing things that they're worried about. They're sharing tips about how to get their kids to sleep when the mum's away for the night. They're sharing like really nice moments of this guy joined, this guy called Sam, and he said we should have a channel in here. We should be called like a good day, where we can just share nice little moments of like things that we've done with the kids. And it's, again, great idea. So people come in there, and then this thing happened this morning. A guy called Alex, who has just had his first kid, and he's been a member of the community because he's been learning about becoming a dad. And he went in and he shared the picture of his kid, and he's like, "Hey, this is my daughter, and here's how the birth went." And da da da. Gosh, it really got me. I thought, yeah, that this momentous event has happened in his life, and one of the first things that he's wanted to do is to come into this group of dads and to say, "Hey, everyone, look, I did it." Or we did it.
Yeah, as you're talking, I'm just thinking about all of this, and it's like something you said earlier. It's so true. At least for me, maybe this is more of an admission than I am intending, but we spend so much time, especially those of us who are like technical and who are lifelong learners, like updating our skills and learning about some new technology and investing in our knowledge for the sake of our careers or just because we're interested. I would be afraid to even see the number if you could add it up, the number of hours I've spent, whether it's, watching like instructional content on something like YouTube, but also going back all those years of university and studying and everything else. And yet there's a sort of like cognitive dissonance in the sense that if you would ask me like, what's my most important job at this point in my life, I would say it's being a dad. Because, emotionally it's true, but you can even logic your way into it. And you think that like anything else I do, with a few exceptions, like within my family roles, I'm replaceable, right? Like you could hire another consultant, you could get somebody else to write the thing, do the thing, fix the website, all the various things that I do in the world, except for, I'm the only son to my parents, I'm the only husband to my wife, and I'm certainly the only dad to my daughter. And like knowing how important that role is, I've certainly tried to lean into that. But just thinking in terms of, going back to the sort of reason for starting the newsletter, just the amount of preparation. I can't say that I've put as much time into preparing for that role, right?
Exactly. And and you think about, because this is, when I was somebody was talking to me about a course. Are you going to do a course? And And I said, yeah, I think it's a great idea. It's something I'd love to do. And I've got lots of ideas about how to do it. And it was just this idea of thinking, wow, the amount of money we spend on training for every other aspect of our lives. Like you're at a company and you go, well, this training module is like $300. Yeah, of course I'll go and do this. Or of course I'll go and do this workshop. And I'll go and the time and the money we spend learning how to be better at so many different things, and we just allow fatherhood to kind of happen. We're making it up as we go along, and I think we're making it up, and we're basing a lot of it on our own models, the parents that we grew up with and what we see around us. But it's so important just to have a group of other dads in your life that you can have these conversations with. There's a great quote of who was the guy who said, I forgot who said it, and he's like, we are the average of the 5 people we spend most time with. And I think about it in terms of fatherhood as well. Like you think of the 5 dads that you spend the most time with, and that will become the kind of dad that you are. And I like to think about that in the new fatherhood sometimes. I like to think that genuinely, I think the bar that we hold fathers accountable to is still incredibly low, especially compared to like the bar that mums feel like they have to meet. For dads, if you stay around and you're not a horrible person and you are involved in the day-to-day running of the house, you're already probably like, hitting it. Versus mums, like this pressure of like to go back to work and to also be present and to not do this wrong, and like all these different things that pressure on. And I like to think sometimes about what would it look like if we did raise the bar, if the bar for fatherhood, we held ourselves to a much higher standard. And when I sit and when I write and I'm talking to people, a lot of it is really in that space of how do we. Bluey is a great example. You watch this kids TV show, Bluey? Bluey is about a family of dogs from Australia. Okay, and there's a dad, a mom, and two kids. And the dad he's not a stay-at-home dad, but he doesn't have a full-time job. He goes away to work sometimes, but he is so involved in the lives of the kid, and he's so active, and he plays with them all the time. The whole show is about the joy of play and like intergenerational play, and how like children discover themselves and the way that the world works, and interacting with everyone else through play. And I wrote about it a while ago, and I said, like, this is the best dad who has ever been on TV. There's never been a better dad on TV than Bandit. A lot of people said, yeah, I love it. He's great. And a few people replied on Twitter, and because I think I wrote it and I tagged in the creator of the show, or the show's account, and they retweeted it. And then I got lots of notes from people. And a few people said, I don't like it because it sets the bar too high. It makes us all look bad. And I kind of replied to the guy and I said, hey, listen, like we need things out there that are setting the bar that high. We need things to, and I have had times over the last year or so where I think, I'm kind of like channeling Bluey's dad energy right now, and it's a nice moment. It's kind of like this is the dad I want to be.
There's something revealing in that, though, because I can understand it's setting the bar too high. Like I can feel the sort of like, I don't know whether it's guilt or shame that could cause that type of a reaction. But at the same time, nobody says like, what the problem with Michael Jordan is, or the thing about Messi, he's just setting the bar too high. I can't dribble that well. No one says that. We hang posters of them on our walls, fully well knowing that like we're never going to be as good as them. And yet, when you raise an example,
in the business world too, nobody turns around and goes, hey, you know what? Like, damn, Jack Dorsey's just making this too hard for the rest of us. He's like a billionaire and he's running two companies. This makes me look bad. No, it's like we need those things, even if we don't agree with them, even if they don't match our lifestyle. The amount that Messi has to give up, and the amount that like some of these founders, the dedication that they have to it. Sure, it's not for everyone, but to have those figures there to be able to say, like,
just knowing what that looks
knowing what that looks like. Yes, that's a great way of saying it. Knowing what that looks like.
It's funny though, there is sort of an idea that, and I think I hear this mostly from women, but not entirely seriously, but there's a grain of truth to it, that like, if we knew how hard it would be, we might not have kids to begin with. Something like that. And I'm even softening it a bit. What advice, if there was something that you could sort of like impart to all the would-be dads of the world that's missing right now? I know it's probably hard to condense it down to one thing, but is there something in particular that's like especially missing? If you could just beam it into the heads of all those future dads.
It's hard because not all men come to fatherhood via the same journey. Like they've had very different experiences growing up. They've had very different like roads towards becoming a parent. It might have happened very quickly, and unintentionally it might have taken a very long time and been very difficult. So it's kind of like there is so much that it might happen when you're 20, it might have happened when you're 50. Like the advice to a 20-year-old new dad and the advice to a 50-year-old new dad, I don't even know what advice I would give a 50-year-old new dad. The one piece of advice that I do give to every single new parent, regardless of their age or their background or anything, is to write, is to take a little book and write something in it every day. Because I look back on that first year, like how old is your daughter, Neville? Okay. I look back on that first year now, and I can't remember anything. I have snippets of, I can't remember anything isn't right. I have snippets of things that happened, and we have pictures and we have like these memories of things that happened. But I know when I was in it that there was so much going on. There was so much that I was thinking about. There was so much, my brain rewiring and coming to terms with being a parent and how life was changing, and my emotions around my daughter and my son second time around, that I wish I could just go back and open something up and like remind myself of what I was going through at the time. So that's one thing that I always suggest people to do. And And I think just to be open and to have the conversation, like there's a thing that happens when you have your first child, which never happens again, really. You go from, if you're in a relationship, a marriage, whatever it might be, you go from being the most important person in the other person's life to both being number two, right? You both go from being like, you are like number one, and then someone else comes along. And it can be tough for people, for men especially. There are men that I know that have struggled with that transition and have acted out in all kinds of different ways, because you go from being the kind of most important person in this person's life to, like, well, you're not number one anymore.
Yeah, and certainly your needs are less urgent, even if, you still hold a certain place. You're an adult, you can take care of yourself.
Exactly. You're an adult, you can take care of yourself, and you also have to take care of this child, this baby, and it's the dynamic changes. And then you have another, and the dynamic changes a little bit again, and you decide to have more. It kind of like constantly grows and grows. But that first time when it kind of changes from a 1-1 to a triangle, it can be a real shock for people if they're not aware of it coming.
Yeah, I think for me the biggest, it's so obvious in hindsight, so maybe I'm just the only one who misses this, but this is true, I think, of a lot of people, of those of us who work in like tech or engineering, maybe marketing too, but like we're very analytical by nature. And I think that brings with it a certain amount of kind of like deliberateness, right? So, you and I sit down to record a podcast today. We schedule it, we plan it. I write down some questions ahead of time. You might think about what you want to say. We might choose our clothing accordingly. We do all sorts of kind of like, I'm planning to do this thing, and so I'm going to prepare in this way. And then we sit down and we record it. Basically, my entire life, that's how things work. Occasionally, life throws a curveball at you, but that's really what happens. Like even if it's school, you get ready in the morning and then you have the school day, and it's a known thing. Having a kid, like you don't sort of choose when that starts and stops once you have a kid. Like your default on, right? It's opt out rather than opt in. Like you're a dad for 24 hours a day, and you're still a dad even if you hire a babysitter or they're in daycare or school, but you're maybe not on exactly at that moment. And that's something totally new. Nothing else in my life has ever worked that way before, where it's like you don't sort of set a time and then go do it. It's just like, I don't care if you're sleepy right now. Like I have a fever, right?
I was talking to my daughter about, I can't remember how we got into the conversation topic, but I was talking to her about nightclubs. And I said, there are these places and grown-ups go to them.
We used to go to them.
Well, grown-ups go to them and they go in there and they dance and they listen to music and they dance till the morning, and then they go home. And then she's like, but then what happens? I say, well, then they go home and go to bed. It's just like, well, what time? I say, I don't know, like 6 a.m., 7 a.m. And her face was like 7 a.m. Like at the time that I wake up, people are going to bed. And I said, yeah, we used to do it all the time. And she said, so naively, she was like, why don't you do it anymore? And I said, well, because if I go to bed at 6 o'clock and you come in and wake me up at 6:30, forget about it. Like it ruins the entire, whatever joy I'm going to get out of a night out like that is going to completely be gone. So she was like, oh, okay, yeah. I get it.
I want to jump around a little bit here. You mentioned this in passing, but it's actually something I wanted to ask you about. Let's go back, I don't know, a decade or so. You moved and landed a job at Google in, I think it was it somewhere around 2011, is that right?
Yeah, I started working for them in 2011 in the UK. And then I spent 4 or 5 years in the UK and then went out and did 2 years in the Bay Area.
By all accounts, Google is considered to be one of the best companies in the world to work for, certainly in terms of salaries, but also famously benefits, right? Whether it's like haircuts at the office, the food on site, which is free and unlimited, and all kinds of other little perks. What made you decide to leave?
I had a friend who worked for Airbnb. I don't know, who was working for Facebook at the time. And we were both living in the Bay Area. And the Bay Area is insanely expensive. Like the salaries are fantastic, yes. But the cost of living is so high that it completely negates whatever you might be earning over there. There is I think it was the US Bureau of Income, or it's some like poverty law group. There was someone who did a study and they said if you're a family and you earn under $150,000 a year in the Bay Area, you live below the poverty line.
That doesn't surprise me, but it's a shocking statistic to hear.
It's shocking, it's obscene. And we got out there and I think I went out there with the intention of making the next step in my career, head to California, do the kind of head office thing for a while, make the next step up. And I just very quickly realized that it wasn't what I wanted. I think being surrounded by people who really, really wanted it and were prepared to do anything to get it made me question whether that was actually the path that I wanted to be on or not. And I was having brunch with a friend. Like, they came around with their kid, and we were sat in the kitchen one day, and we were both thinking about leaving. He was at Facebook, I was at Google. We had these jobs. I was probably, I would have been, I'm 38 now, 34. Yeah, 34 maybe, 33, 34. And I turned around to him and I said, are we crazy? Like, is this stupid that we are both contemplating quitting these companies that everyone wants to work for? We're in the city that everyone wants to move to if they work in the tech industry, working for the two companies that everyone wants to work for. Like, are we wrong? And he said, no, the way that I think about it is, how lucky are we to not even be halfway through our 30s, to have got the kind of like the job and the thing that people want, and to know that it's not actually what we want, to know that it's not enough, to know that it's not the end goal. It's like we could have spent our entire life getting here, and we're here now, and we know that the actual path that we want to be on is somewhere else. And it was a huge kind of light bulb moment of going, yeah, that's it. It's just the end of this chapter. Because I felt like from like I said before, I've been on the internet since I was tiny, and always thought of Google as this incredible thing, and the things that they made and the opportunities that they brought to so many people, and I always thought I wanted that. That's what I wanted, and to get it, and to be inside, and to have spent like a good 8 years there, and a lot of time, and really figuring out how it all works. Then to be able to step away from it and say, no, I think the answer is somewhere else.
What was missing? I mean, you mentioned cost of living. Would another $50,000 or $100,000 a year fix the issue, or was there something deeper that was driving that decision?
It's all down to the journey that you're on. And for some people, they will think, yeah, another 100,000, another 200,000, but like, where does that stop? Because the fees, like school fees and rent, and all these things. And I think we just asked ourselves, like my wife and I, we just said, do we see ourselves being here long term? Like, is this where we're going to be? And our daughter at that time was nearly 4. So we were having to start thinking about schools. We were having to start thinking about like all these things when you think about putting down roots. And also a friend told me this thing about his kid was in school, and they were teaching nursery rhymes about what to do if someone comes in with a gun. And I was having this conversation with friends in the US, and they said, well, the chances are so low, and it's, 1 in a million, and And I said, yeah, but everywhere else in the world, the chances are significantly lower, like close to zero. Nowhere is ever going to be zero. Just a moment of going, I don't think this is where we're going to stay. I don't think this is where things are going. And then starting to figure out, okay, well, if we're going to blow things up, rethink things dramatically in that way, how might it work? And that was us. We went on sabbatical for 6 months. We traveled for a while, Japan, South Korea, Bali, like spent some time kind of coming back through Europe, seeing friends and family. And then we were about to go back, and we were about to fly out to India and spend some time in Kenya as well. And we found out we were expecting our second. We're like, oh shit. Yeah. So we kind of like kiboshed that next leg of the plan and moved over here in Barcelona, where we've been for 3 years now. And really like an incredible city and a fantastic quality of life here.
It strikes me a few interesting points there. I know from just reading your writing on this subject that wasn't sort of the first move in your kind of family history. I think, was it your parents that had gone from Manchester to London?
No, my interest. Yeah, so I was talking to a friend about this just yesterday. My parents moved from Ireland to the UK, and my wife's parents moved from like India and Uganda to the UK too. So we were both, first generation born of immigrant. My parents didn't immigrate quite as far as my wife's parents did, but you grow up looking at that, and you're a lot more open to the idea of where you might be. And then I moved down to London when I was about 25, 26, and then we moved out to SF. So the idea of we're not tied to a particular location. And we're not tied to this. Look, we're really happy here, and we've started to put down some really good roots. And like, as you know yourself, Spain is a fantastic country for like quality of life and for raising a family. The general attitudes towards children here are so great. Like, people love seeing kids around, and people, kids are out playing all the time, and even like late into the night, and it feels very welcoming. So this is, for us, the best place to be right now, for sure.
It's funny how we have such similar kind of paths. Yeah, my parents moved from Northern Ireland and India to the US. I bounced around, just kind of nomading for a while. Found out we were expecting. We had just spent a few months in Central Asia, effectively Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Mongolia, and we were in Georgia. And then, told family and everybody, and decided, okay, well, this is it. We can either move back to Washington, D.C., where I grew up and where my wife had been living before and where we met, and just sort of like play it safe and, go home, or pick somewhere knowing that, unlike all that kind of nomadic travel before, it wasn't just going to be like, all right, I've had enough of this place, let's move on, that there would be other considerations, especially around in terms of pregnancy and delivery, wanting to be somewhere you really like the hospital system and you feel safe, but also, bigger picture where kids are a priority. And you and I only ended up, a few hours apart between Valencia and Barcelona, and that. And I often describe Valencia to people as, well, if you've been to Barcelona, it's kind of the same idea, just like, the store brand version, because we don't have Picasso and Gaudi. But it's that same lifestyle, and a little bit cheaper and a little bit less crime, but basically the same idea. And we've got the paella. But what's interesting to me, though, and I'm making some assumptions here, but in the journeys we talked about, so from Northern Ireland to Manchester, from Manchester to London, in your case, and then London to San Francisco, certainly all seem like they were moves for economic opportunity, right? Like the grass is greener over there. There's better jobs over there. The economy isn't so bad over there. Or just, hey, if I want to, reach the pinnacle of my career, right? As many people move to New York City for the same reason, or move to the city, move to London, move to San Francisco. It's like, hey, if you want to work at headquarters, if you want a shot at like making it to the top, you got to go there, even if your life is okay where you were. And now you've gone in the opposite direction. There's almost no comparison between San Francisco and Barcelona in terms of like economic opportunities, but in terms of quality of life, it's like totally the other way around.
Game changer. Yeah. I think it's really David L. Brooks' book, The Second Mountain, which I wrote about. I wrote this thing on the newsletter a while ago, This Isn't You Are Not Your Job, which really resonated and kind of like picked up massively as well outside of the fatherhood sphere, because it was really around how we come to identify ourselves through our jobs. And actually, even surnames like Smith, like all these names that are kind of like Smith, Butcher, like, all these names that are actually just jobs. Not only do you look for your job as your personality, but your great grandfather's job might actually be your name anyway. And how we're just kind of waking up to the fact that there is more to life than work. And there is more to someone than what they do. I say this to people all the time. I learned something a while ago, and it was born of the frustration of, if you live in Washington, D.C., or you live there, you grew up there, this no doubt, which is people just say like, hey, what's your name? What do you do? It's the very first question that people ask. They ask it in the Bay Area all the time. And it's exhausting. And I learned if your job is that you help polar bears stay alive, if you save the whales, right? You're going to get that into every single conversation somehow. Even if we're not talking about anything to do with it, you'll be like, oh, it's kind of like, this thing I've been doing about saving all the whales. Versus if your job is that you do the opposite of save the whales, you help ExxonMobil reduce their tax bill and cover up oil spills, and that's what your job is, and you ask someone that thing and they don't want to talk about it, you're kind of like putting them into a place where, okay, yeah, I don't want to talk about this, or I'll lie, or I'll say something else. And I think taking that step away from, I have friends here, I've been out with them maybe a dozen times. I have no idea what they do. It's amazing. People don't care. People don't define themselves by work. And I think the David Brooks thing, the Second Mountain, and I kind of touched on this in this You Are Not Your Job essay, is that all those moves that I made were scaling the first mountain. Like, Manchester to London, the big smoke is what they call London. If you're anywhere else in the UK, like the big smoke, it's kind of there. It's like, this is where you head. That's where you're going. London to San Francisco, take that step up, go to the head office. It's like scaling this first mountain to get to the peak of what I believed success was. And then what Brooke says in the book is that people they scale the first mountain and there's a feeling of like emptiness. There's a feeling of like, is that it? Is this what I was going for? And then when you get to the top of the first mountain, the second mountain comes into view. And the first mountain is it's about kind of, part of it is happiness. It's about success. It's about kind of like achieving a measure of success that you kind of held yourself to through your life. The second mountain is around finding your joy, finding purpose, finding like what you really want to do. And in writing with the new fatherhood, that really feels like, I feel like I finally figured out, but it feels like I'm starting to head up that second mountain. In the people it's exposed me to, in the conversations I'm having, in the emails that I get from people all the time, like, you wrote this, and I get an email, I get a few emails every week, and it always contains some kind of line of, gosh, I really didn't mean to write this much and tell you all of this, but I just kind of started and I couldn't stop. And Brené Brown talks about this thing called the vulnerability loop. And when you are more open and vulnerable with someone, they can either reject that vulnerability, whoa, too much, or they lean into it and they share something again. And kind of like that vulnerability loop it kind of perpetuates and it becomes stronger and stronger. And it's how you get to these, stronger, deeper relationships that as men, we really struggle with sometimes. We don't really struggle with sometimes. In general, like men, we tend to operate at the surface level, and we talk about football and we talk about work, but we don't talk about like how we feel. We don't talk about like, what, this fatherhood thing is fucking tough, and it's really hard for me, and I'm struggling, and my wife is struggling with this, and I have these feelings towards the kid, and like all these things that we've just met, like men don't talk about. And the idea of with my writing is I am vulnerable because I hope that it makes people more comfortable to be the same. And I invite people to write for the new fatherhood. And I have this contributor's guide that I've written, and I say, when you're writing, err on the side of being more vulnerable, err on the side of sharing more than you're comfortable doing, because we can always edit it out later. You can always go back and you can say, you know what, I don't want to, this line feels like something I don't want to say to the world, but it's really hard to go back and like add more vulnerability into it after the fact.
Yeah.
Actually, you know what I mean? You go, I should have been a bit more emotional here. It's like, no, get it out on the page and be write it down the way that you would tell yourself.
Yeah.
Like warts and all. And then we want to step things back, we can step things back.
That's something I've like personally struggled with as well, just creating, writing, being online. Now, I was having a conversation with a friend recently who's like, I don't know, man, I think you're pretty out there, like in terms of putting myself out there, but that has been a long journey as well, because I have that. I think that, yeah, what you're describing, that sort of typical male aversion to vulnerability, but also, a certain cultural kind of like, only show the good side, like don't show the behind the scenes stuff, right? That's for what the curtain is there for, right? Like there's a certain show that you put on for the world, and there's a certain amount of stuff that happens backstage. And emotionally, what you're saying, I think totally makes sense. But even, not to cheapen it, but even like practically on the internet these days, like what you're describing is what resonates. That's what people want to see. That it's not a coincidence that like social media has taken off the way that it has, and that, like traditional TV can't keep up in the same way and things like that. Like people want to see authentic, real life things that they can associate with, especially the younger generations. This sort of like overly produced just doesn't land at all anymore.
The problem is though that they're not, a lot of these things aren't authentic, aren't remotely authentic. It's like this faux authenticity. Something that I haven't fully figured out yet is, it's like this, to go back to the thing about promoting your work and promoting books and podcasts and all these things like this, is there's this kind of like Faustian pact of leaning into these platforms that provide you with distribution and engagement, and at the same time that being uncomfortable with the role that they're playing in people's lives. And, New Fatherhood has an Instagram account. It has, 2,500 followers, and it's people like it and I share things to it and I post out memes and I post updates and things like that. But genuinely, if someone said to me tomorrow, like, hey, do you want me to wave a wand and get rid of Instagram completely? And everyone just spends the time that they would spend on Instagram with their kids, I would say, yes, please, like, take it. If it means, even if it means less people reading the newsletter, yeah, go for it. It's trying to square this circle that I don't think I've been able to do yet of like how much do we share and how much do you feel comfortable sharing and how far back do you pull the curtain, which is why I like writing, because I can be a lot more considered about it and I can kind of, it's less of a like constant stream of everything, and it's more of a considered encapsulation of a certain, you know, like I'm writing this tomorrow's newsletter, it's going to be about video games, which is something I love, you know, and I stopped playing them recently. But also the crux of the essay is around this idea of 65% of jobs that our children will do don't exist yet. How do you know that the time that your kid is wasting, quote unquote, on Minecraft is actually time that's wasted?
Yeah, and for our generation, it was time wasted on the computer and Mario and whatever else, and all of those things turned out to be, like, if you look at all the people who are like held up today as successful, they're the ones who were doing stuff like that.
Completely. Like I built a PC at 12 or 13 years old.
Same.
I did it.
I got in trouble for taking apart the computer.
Yeah, and I did it because I did it because I wanted a faster graphics card so I could play, I think it was Magic Carpet. And where did that, my parents were like, yeah, go for it. You know, well, if you want a piece, you want to do this, go for it. And there was times where they must have been scratching their head going, he's playing this thing a lot. There's no way I get that job at Google had I not been doing all that stuff since I was like 10, 11 years old.
Yeah, I think that's the thing with screen times that I struggle with. I mean, so far, our daughter's so young that it's there's really no question that it's just a blanket like prohibition. I mean, aside from like FaceTiming grandparents, but like that's a little different in the sense that she's not like in control of what's going on the screen. It's just there is a screen there, but no TV, no cartoons, no video games, nothing like that. No kind of like, you know, here, be quiet, take this. And I'd like to keep that going for a while, but at the same time, I recognize the sort of hypocrisy of it. And one, that like, you know, I spend time on a screen, so if it's really that bad for you, right, what am I doing? But also what you talked about in the sense of like, even the stuff that looks like, you know, just pure kind of like addictive entertainment, right? Gaming being the classic example. I mean, look, Facebook just renamed themselves to Meta. Everybody's talking about the metaverse. Like that's clearly built on the back of things like, yeah, Roblox and Minecraft and all of these virtual worlds. And if we really believe that's where the economy's going, then, you know, who's to say that playing all those games isn't the equivalent of apprenticing for the local blacksmith, you know, 100 or 200 years ago?
Absolutely. That's a really good way of looking at it. But you can't, when we broad brushstroke and just say every second spent on a screen is bad as time not well spent, I don't think it's right. And I think it's very short-sighted. There are, of course, things that kids should, you know, reading and being outside and like all these things. But just to say like any time spent doing this is time that is not well spent, I think is very short-sighted. There's the great post on Medium from a few years ago. This guy, Andy Bio, who runs a website called Waxy and runs a festival in Portland called XOXO. And he wrote about how he was introducing his kids to video games by playing them in order. So like going back and starting with Pong and doing Space Invaders and all the way through the history of everything up to the modern day with his kid. And I thought, that's great. That's such a smart way to do it as well, because you can't go back and enjoy those games after you've played, you know, like after you've played Fortnite, you can't go back and play Qbert. You'd be like, what is this? This is ridiculous. But to kind of like to see the evolution of it is really smart.
Yeah, it's funny with art history. We like take it for granted that that's how you learn art, right? You study this sort of progression of technique and ability to like render what we see over time. But taking that approach to video games and basically saying like, look, this is what we collectively as a species between our technology and our design had figured out, you know, by whatever, 1975 all the way through 50 years later. That's really cool. I think I would do something like that purely for like selfish motivations, just that I would love to go back and play the Super Nintendo games of my childhood and also have that be like a bonding experience with my own kids at some point.
100%. I mean, I bought one of those Nintendo Classics and Super Nintendo Classics with that goal in mind as well. It's like, I'm going to, show my daughter how to play Mario Kart and everything like that. So it's really...
Exactly.
And I think things moved on so quickly in that space that you kind of forget the impact that like something like Super Mario World 64 had, like this 3D game where completely, when you look at things from an art history point of view, it's like completely and utterly changed the entire industry, can change the entire medium.
Yeah. One last jump around. We talked briefly about you kind of moving to Barcelona and both of us moving to Spain for similar reasons. You had a post that you wrote about that that I loved, about how to choose where to live. I'd love to just kind of like dive into that a little bit more and then get a better sense of like how you made the choice, and if this is not like necessarily a permanent move, how you would look at maybe potentially moving again in future.
It's funny. We moved in. When did you move to Spain? We moved in 2018.
We moved into this apartment the same week that I ate in an indoor restaurant for the last time. So end of February of last year. We had been here before, and then we went back to the States for a bit, and then we kind of like Airbnb'd and checked places, but we actually like settled into like a long-term place the week of the like everything going crazy.
Wow. And then the lockdown here, which was incredibly brutal. So many people now are talking about where to live and designing the life that they want to have and stepping away from full-time work or nomad, like all these different things that are really like COVID has brought to the foreground in a way that I think people weren't having these conversations publicly and with each other. So I'd end up talking to friends and giving them advice and them asking, why did you pick Barcelona, and how did you figure out what you wanted to do? And in my head, I'd always had this model of the kind of the Venn diagrams, the three different spots, and thinking about what was important to us at any one time, and always having found it difficult to hit all three. So in my mind, thinking about what are the three things that are important for us, and one was proximity to family, one was quality of life, and one was career opportunities. And when we went to San Francisco, it's like, okay, career opportunities are great. Quality of life is good. It's like California, it's expensive, but you can kind of like go out and you can be outdoors a lot. But we're so far away from family, 12, 13 hours on a flight. And then somewhere like London is fantastic, like really close to family and friends, good career opportunities. But the quality of life is, the weather has such a big effect on it. And you're inside for 6 months of the year. And so we started to think about things in that scale. And we just went, okay, well, if we're going to start in our own thing up, we can work opportunities is less important because we can kind of physically be anywhere. Somewhere with good weather, somewhere that we can easily fly to different places, where family 2 hours away from playing, we just thought it's going to be Barcelona or Lisbon, something like that. So then I kind of reverse engineered that model as a way to help other people. This idea being, listen, sit down if you're on your own, or sit down with your partner and decide between both of you, what are your like 3 or 4 most important priorities? And it could be career, it could be cost of living, weather, culture, like crime, like all these different things. And then figure out all the places that sit in different parts of that Venn and see how many of them fit in the middle. And if you find them that fit in the middle, figure out a way to move there. And the last bit is a gross oversimplification, right? It's kind of like that 1, 2, 3 question mark for profit. It's like, move there. To be honest, choosing a place to live is probably harder than actually moving there. Because once you figure it out...
You mentioned economic opportunities, and I think that's the thing that's changed so dramatically in the last year, is that, there are some of us who've been either freelancing or running our own businesses or finding ways to work remotely for a long time now. But I mean, everyone knows now that this is here to stay, and remote work is a big thing, and this has changed. And not every company is going to let you work wherever you want to work or live wherever you want to live. But like, that's gone from being this sort of like tiny kind of niche thing that you've got to create for yourself to like, it's very realistic now to find a job that will let you just be wherever. And so your economic opportunities are no longer constrained by where you choose to live. Not to mention, maybe the friction is lower. You don't even necessarily have to quit your existing job to just be able to move somewhere different. And I think now what we're going to see are places, you mentioned Lisbon. I think it's probably like one of the early major benefactors of this whole situation, in that like a lot of people, they already have EU citizenship, as it were, and they can live anywhere in Europe. And they're looking at the continent and saying, okay, like, where's the weather decent? The price is not bad. The quality of living is good. They like the food. And there's a ton of other young people making the same decisions. So there's like a kind of growing community, and people are moving there. And certainly here in Spain, I think we're going to see a lot more of that.
I think you're right. And what becomes really interesting, I have a friend here who works for Coinbase, fully remote. I have a friend here who works for Spotify. I think what we'll see happen over the next few years, those companies that are holding out on remote work will start to see all the kind of best talent that want more flexible options and more flexible arrangements go to their competitors. And within a few years, those companies are going to be like, oh, you know what? We lost a lot of good people and we actually can't hire people at the moment. We need to start to offer these opportunities as well. Like, you're right. The things have changed, and I don't see, the genie going back in the bottle. I think this hybrid model is going to work for some companies. I think it's a stopgap. I think there's the world where everyone goes away and they come together for 2 or 3, like a handful of offsites a year is maybe where things are going.
Yeah, exactly. That's like automatic, the people behind WordPress. That's been their model for a long time. They're fully remote, but they have certain overlap between people who need it, but they're generally more asynchronous. And then yes, they have these retreats when they can, where they bring people together, and they've obviously been very successful. And I think a lot of companies are now going to start to emulate that model. And as you said, the ones who aren't are effectively going to be forced to, or they're just going to have to pay like very high salaries to make up the difference, because otherwise, even people who don't necessarily want to like move around a lot or anything, just given the choice of like the same job, the same salary, 2 companies of similar prestige, one allows you to work remotely and one doesn't. It's a no-brainer, because like and especially if you're thinking about having kids, or you think, you and I both have family that's kind of spread out or in different places, not necessarily where the companies are. And it's like, oh yeah, well, what if I do want to just, go spend a month with my parents? Do I have to take a month off of work?
One of the interesting things about New Fatherhood is this isn't my day job. Same as like Never Normal is not your day job. It's my day job is in kind of marketing, advertising, branding. I took a lot of what I learned through the time at Google and I synthesized it down into a workshop. It's 4 days. Okay. And pre-COVID, I would fly out and I would run that workshop. Now I'm thinking, well, if everybody's remote, maybe the idea of flying everyone to Barcelona is a better sell than me coming to wherever you are. And just like, hey, have an offsite, have a retreat, fly everyone here. We go out somewhere in the countryside. We have like nice dinners and we run a workshop, and we're figuring things out at the same time as all getting together and having a nice time. And I don't know, like I think these opportunities are going to start to pop up as people figure out how to plug the gaps that exist inside companies' organizations and their approaches to problem solving. Now everyone's going through it.
I think you bring up a really interesting thing. Like in the short term, everything is still remote, but as we start to kind of see the post-pandemic world, new opportunities to bring people together where it's like thoughtful and not just kind of the default for the sake of it, start to become really interesting. Well, I think that's a great place to leave it. I'll make sure that we link to a few different posts from the New Fatherhood and link to the newsletter so people can sign up. Anywhere else you'd recommend people find you online, or things you'd recommend checking out?
On Instagram is New Fatherhood. To sign up for the email, newfatherhood.email. thenewfatherhood.org is where everything is. I think that's pretty much it. It was really, really nice to chat to you. It was a good chat.
Fantastic. Likewise.